The scariest thing I've ever found in the woods wasn't a carcass or a footprint. It was something that had been placed exactly where it would be impossible to ignore. I've been hiking and backpacking for about a decade, and over that time I've seen the usual strange stuff. Half-collapsed lean-tos, fire rings that looked too new to be legal, and animal tracks that made you stop and double-check your field guide. None of it made me consider quitting. That changed at the very beginning of winter last year, when the forest looked dead but not fully buried yet. There wasn't much snow, just thin patches in the shade, but the temperature had dropped enough that the ground was locked solid. Every step crunched loudly, like you were walking on a tray of broken glass covered in leaves. The air had that clean, metallic bite that makes your nostrils sting. My buddy Aaron and I planned a weekend trip to a state forest about 3 hours north of where we lived. The whole point was isolation. No scenic overlooks, no marked campsites, no families in sneakers asking how much farther it was to the waterfall. We wanted to hike off-trail, tuck ourselves into the trees, and spend one last night pretending we were tougher than the weather. We parked at the trailhead around 10 a.m. and headed in. The woods were the color of old paper, gray trunks, brown leaves, bare branches, with a few dense pockets of pine where the world suddenly went darker and quieter. By afternoon, the light had that low, slanted winter angle, and the shadows between the trees started looking longer than they should. Around 4 p.m., with the sun already sinking, we started looking for a place to set up. We found a spot right beside a narrow creek where the water ran icy clear over smooth gray stones. There was a flat clearing about 10 feet from the bank, backed by a thick wall of pines on 3 sides.
It felt protected, like the creek was a natural boundary and the pines were a fence. We took our time setting up, like we always did. Cleared rocks, kicked away sticks, walked the perimeter for deadfall. We were everywhere in that clearing, stepping over the same roots, circling the same boulders, talking about nothing. And I'm saying this because it matters. There was nothing out of place. No trash, no old gear, no signs someone had been there recently. We pitched our small 2-person tent with the door facing the creek, partly because the sound of moving water helps you sleep, and partly because we liked knowing exactly what was in front of us when we unzipped that door at night. By the time we got a fire going, it was pitch black. The cold crept in under our coats and sat on our shoulders. We made freeze-dried beef stroganoff, which tastes like salty cardboard until you're hungry enough that it feels like a reward. And we ate sitting on a log we dragged close to the coals. We stayed up talking until around 10:30. Normal stuff. Work, relationships, games, anything but the fact that the forest around us had gone so still it felt like the world was paused. Eventually Aaron stood, stretched, and said he was tapping out. I told him I'd be in after I drowned the coals. I spent another 15 minutes pouring creek water on the fire, stirring it into mud and kicking dirt until it was cold enough to touch. Before I crawled into the tent, I swept my headlamp around one last time. The beam hit tree trunks, pine needles, the glint of the creek. Nothing moved. I zipped up, slid into my sleeping bag, and listened to Aaron's breathing turn into a soft snore. The ground was hard. My hips ached, but the creek's steady rush eventually pulled me under.
In early winter, all that disappears, and the quiet feels manufactured, like somebody turned down the volume on the world. That night, the cold made every smell sharper. Smoke in our clothes, nylon from the tent, the mineral scent of the creek. When I lay there listening to Aaron breathe, I remember feeling grateful for the sound, because it proved there was another human being nearby. At some point in the night, I woke up briefly, not fully awake, just drifting near the surface. I thought I heard something outside the tent. Not a footstep, more like fabric rubbing against fabric, like a sleeve brushing nylon. I held my breath, waiting for it to repeat, but the creek kept rushing and the sound didn't come back. I convinced myself it was the wind shifting the rainfly and fell asleep again. When we packed up that morning, the cold made the tent poles feel like frozen metal bones. The shot cord barely wanted to flex. My fingers, even in gloves, kept fumbling buckles, and each mistake made me angrier because it stole seconds. Seconds felt expensive. I kept picturing someone standing just beyond the pines, watching us scramble, enjoying how the fear made us clumsy. I slept heavier than I usually do while camping. Normally, a squirrel scratching in leaf litter will wake me up. That night, I didn't hear anything. No twig snaps, no footsteps, no animals, just darkness and water. When I woke up, it was around 6:30 a.m., That washed-out gray light where you can see shapes, but everything looks drained of color. The tent was a freezer. I could see my breath puffing in front of my face, and the inside of the rainfly had a thin crust of frost that glittered when I moved. I needed to use the bathroom, so I tried to unzip my sleeping bag quietly so I wouldn't wake Aaron. I put my boots on, reached for the tent zipper, and pulled.
The sound was obnoxiously loud in the winter quiet. Zzz-zip, like tearing Velcro in a church. I pushed the flap open and looked out. My heart didn't drop. It stopped. Sitting on a flat rock, directly in front of our tent, maybe 4 feet from the door, was a toy. A stuffed animal. It was a dirty blue teddy bear, the kind that might have been a Care Bear knockoff from the 80s. The stomach symbol was worn off into a bald, grimy patch. One plastic eye was scratched, like someone had dragged it over gravel. The fur was matted and wet, darkened as if it had been soaked and left to dry. But the worst part wasn't the bear itself. It was how it was positioned. It wasn't tossed there. It wasn't slumped on its side like a forgotten kid's toy. It was sitting perfectly upright, legs straight out, arms pinned to its sides, and its head was turned slightly so it was facing the tent door, facing me, like it had been posed to watch whoever opened that zipper. I froze so hard my knees locked. My brain fought for an explanation and came back empty. I had stepped around that rock a dozen times the day before. I had walked past it with firewood. I had stood near it with my headlamp on. It wasn't there. I backed into the tent slowly, like sudden movement might trigger something. My breathing went shallow and fast. I reached across and shook Aaron's shoulder. "Aaron, wake up, now." He groaned, irritated. "What? What time is it?" "Just look outside," I whispered. He sat up, rubbed his face, and leaned forward to the open flap. I watched his expression shift from sleepy annoyance to confusion, and then, in a single beat, to fear. "What is that?" he hissed. "Did you put that there?" "No," I said, my voice sounding too loud even though I barely breathed it. "I just woke up." I opened the door, and it was there.
Aaron stared past the bear into the trees. Is someone out there? We listened. Nothing. Just the creek. That constant, indifferent rush. It was maddening. If a branch snapped, at least there'd be a direction. If someone laughed, at least we'd know we weren't crazy. But the woods held their breath. "We need to go," Aaron said. "Right now." I grabbed my knife from the side pocket of my pack, mostly because doing something with my hands made me feel less helpless. We both crawled out, half expecting someone to jump from behind a tree with a camera, yelling it was a prank. Nobody did. The forest just stood there, gray and still. Up close, the bear smelled like mildew and old dirt. It was soaked through, but it was sitting on a patch of rock that was dry, like it had been placed there after the frost settled, or like it had been kept somewhere wet and then brought out just before dawn. I crouched and pointed at the ground around the rock. The soil was frozen hard, layered with dead leaves and pine needles. We searched for boot prints, for toe marks, for anything that would tell us a person had stood there. But the frozen ground didn't take impressions, and the debris disguised whatever might have been there. "Someone had to walk right up to the tent while we were sleeping," Aaron said, his voice trembling. That thought made my stomach roll. The tent fabric is thin. If someone had been standing there, they would have been inches from our heads, close enough that we would have heard breathing if the wind shifted, close enough that a hand could have pressed against the tent wall and made a shadow. They didn't steal anything. They didn't tear the tent. They didn't even touch our packs. They just left the bear. Like a message. Like proof. "Forget breakfast," I said. "Pack it up." We tore camp down in record time. Normally we're careful. Roll the tent, pack the poles, keep things organized. That morning we shoved everything into bags like we were trying to outrun a fire. I kept scanning the tree line while my hands did their own frantic work. The woods felt different now. Yesterday they felt empty. Now they felt crowded, as if 100 eyes were behind every trunk. A few times I thought I saw movement in my peripheral vision, but when I smacked my head around,
It was only a branch swaying in the wind. That's the problem with winter woods. Everything moves just enough to make you doubt yourself. We left the blue bear on the rock. Neither of us wanted to touch it. It felt contaminated, not with germs, but with intent. The hike back to the car was a nightmare. We moved fast, almost jogging, crunching loudly through frozen leaves. Every 50 yards, one of us looked behind. Every time the wind pushed dry leaves across the ground, we jumped. We didn't talk. We just kept going, like if we acknowledged what happened, it would become more real. We cut the trip 2 days short. We were supposed to stay through Sunday. We were back at the trailhead by noon on Friday. When we climbed into the car and locked the doors, relief hit so hard it made me lightheaded. And then, the question started. Aaron didn't do it. I know that the way you know your own name. He'd been asleep before me, and I'd been awake before him. Plus, I'd known him for years. He's not the type to stage a prank that would require waking up early, walking into a freezing clearing, and somehow finding a filthy teddy bear in the middle of nowhere. And I didn't do it. I didn't bring a teddy bear on a backcountry trip. I didn't wake up in the night and place it there and then erase my own memory. Which leaves one option.
Someone else did it. The more we drove, the more details turned sharp in my mind. The bear's head turned slightly toward the tent, the way the wet fur stuck together in clumps, the fact that it sat on a dry rock despite being soaked. That last one haunted me because it suggested timing. Someone placed it there recently, close to when I woke up. We talked about calling the ranger station, but what would we even say? We found a creepy stuffed animal. They'd assume it was litter or an old toy left by a family. Except we were off trail, deep in the state forest, and the whole point was no one should have been near us. Still, we reported it. A tired-sounding ranger took the information and asked for coordinates. I gave him my best guess using the map app's last cached pin. He told me they'd check it out when they could, but with the season changing, they were short-staffed. That should have been the end of it, a creepy incident, an unsettling mystery. But 2 weeks later, Aaron called me at 11:30 p.m. His voice sounded wrong, flat and breathless. "I got something in the mail," he said. "What do you mean, something?" "No return address. Just a box." I sat up in bed. "Did you open it?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "It's a stuffed bear. Blue. Wet. Same scratched eye." My mouth went dry. "How would someone know where you live?" "That's what I'm asking you." We'd never told anyone about the bear besides a ranger. We hadn't posted it. We hadn't joked about it online. It was the kind of story you keep private because you know how it sounds. I told Aaron to call the police. He said he did. An officer came out, looked at the box, and basically shrugged. No threats, no note, no fingerprints that mattered, just a creepy object. The officer suggested it was a prank by a friend. Aaron laughed, one sharp, humorless sound.
"Then why was it wet?" he asked. "It's below freezing. Why does it look like it came out of water?" After the call, I sat in my dark apartment and listened to the radiator tick. For the first time since the trip, I realized something. If someone had been in that clearing with us, close enough to place a bear 4 feet from our tent, they were close enough to do worse. And if the bear showed up at Aaron's house, that meant the forest wasn't the only place we were being watched. I drove to Aaron's place the next day. He had the bear in a plastic storage bin on his kitchen table, like you'd quarantine an animal that bit you. The fur was still matted. The smell of mildew still clung to it. He said it had been that way when he opened the box, wet, like it had been sealed up damp on purpose. We threw it away together, double-bagged, tied tight, straight into the dumpster behind his building. It felt ridiculous to treat a toy like evidence, but neither of us could stand the idea of it sitting in either of our homes. For a while, nothing happened. Weeks went by, the memory dulled at the edges, like maybe our fear had been the real story. Then in early January, I went hiking alone on a familiar local trail, busy, marked, close to town. I did it on purpose as a kind of therapy. I wanted normal woods back. I wanted to hear other people's footsteps and see dogs and feel foolish for ever being scared of trees. I stopped at a bench near a small creek that ran under the trail. The water was partially iced over, but you could still hear it moving under the skin of ice. That sound should have been calming. Instead, it made my neck tighten. I looked down,
And tucked under the bench, perfectly centered like someone had measured it, was a new blue teddy bear, cleaner than the first, but the same shade, with the same cheap plastic eyes.
This one was dry, but its head was turned slightly, angled up at me. I didn't touch it. I didn't take a picture. I just walked back to my car with my hands shoved in my pockets, trying not to look over my shoulder. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I got up for water and caught myself staring at my front door. I checked the lock once. Then, without thinking, I checked it again. When I turned back toward the kitchen, something blue sat on the floor at the end of the hallway, right where the light from the fridge spills out in a pale rectangle. It hadn't been there when I walked to the sink. It was sitting upright, legs out, arms at its sides, head turned slightly toward me.